to the 5th installment of my video build diary for my Stone Roses tribute guitar based on this RC1 kit from Pitbull Guitars. Now, since the last installment, I've been finishing the painting on the body of the guitar. So you might remember at the end of the last installment, I had 2 coats of primer on the body and I was going to level it off with 1200 grit sandpaper. So I've done that. I put another 2 coats of primer on the body and the headstock, and then I've gone ahead and I've sprayed 2 coats of white enamel over the top of the primer. So I just bought this white enamel from Super Cheap Autos. You know, it's nothing special, it's just whatever the guy recommended from the shop. It went on really well, no complaints. I've had no runs, no nothing, so I'm really happy with the way it's gone. So, you know, it's all looking really good. The jobs I have to do now, really, is to get it ready so that I can, you know, start to do the pollock on it. First job is to scrape the binding clean. Now, usually that's the one part of these, you know, spray-on finishes that I always make a mistake on, always stuff up. So what I've done to help me this time is I've had a bit of a look on the internet about, you know, what's the best way to achieve, you know, good clean binding without making too many mistakes. And it seems that the collective wisdom of the internet is that you should build a binding scraper jig. So that's what I've gone and done. So what I've done, I've just got a bit of wood and I've split it down the middle with my coping saw. And into that split, I can stick my razor blade, and then you know, just to hold the razor blade tight in place, I've got a nut with a wing. Well, I've got a screw with a wing nut through the top. So basically, I can now position the blade at whatever depth I want. Okay, so this one's at the moment is set for you know, the edge binding. And basically now I can run the piece of wood along the edge of the guitar, and there's no way it's going to go further than the width of the binding. So fingers crossed, I should be able to get a nice clean job with this jig. I actually made up 2 jigs, one for the side of the binding and one for the top of the binding. Now the top of the binding is going to be a real trick because it's only 1 ply thick. You know, well, it's maybe a millimetre, it might be less than a millimetre, but it's very, very thin. And another problem too is that when you're sanding the end grain on the guitar, typically, you know, you overrun the binding quite a bit, and in places where you've had to sand hard on the end grain, you've worn away that binding a little bit. So the binding in places is not as thick as in other places. So you've got to be careful that in those places especially that you don't run over onto the wood when you're scraping the binding clean. So what I've decided is, well, when I set my jig, I'll set it, you know, a little bit smaller than the typical binding width, and therefore I should be able to get around without even in those thin places not taking the paint back to the wood. Anyway, I'm going to give it a go and see how it goes. Okay, so here's my 1 ply binding jig. I don't even know whether you can see that, but the blade sticking out from the edge of the wood, it's just a sliver of blade left on the work side of the jig. Anyway, I'm going to give it a go and see if I can't scrape some of this binding clean. Just take it easy, slow and steady, because you know, it only takes 1 stuff up to ruin it. You know, you're better off just taking your time, getting it done well instead of rushing. Of course, that's always my issue. I tend to rush things when I shouldn't. So my wife says anyway. Well, I finished scraping around the top of the binding with my small jig, and I'm absolutely amazed with the good job it's done. There's so many projects in the past that I've stuffed up, especially on the top of the binding, but this looks fantastic. Yeah, come and have a close look at that. You know, you can see it's just completely even, no wood showing, you know, it's just a class job. I'm just so impressed with how well this jig has worked out. So now it's time for me to go on to my side binding with my other jig, and hopefully it'll turn out just as well. Okay, here we go. I'll just measure it, make sure I've got it right. I'm pretty sure I have. Got the width right. It's a little bit of overrun here. Paint overrun, that is. Okay, well that's done. You wouldn't believe, you know, what a nice edge there is on there. You know, no problems at all. But I've got to say that using the wider jig for the sides was, you know, a little harder than on the top. I guess because you've got, you know, a wider blade area. It was harder to get the depth right, and it was harder to drag the blade along the binding. But anyway, I got there in the end, and it all looks sweet. So that body now is basically ready to accept our colour. So I'm not going to do anything more with that. I'm going to set it aside, make sure I don't damage it in any way, and go on to the neck. Now for the neck, well, I've already painted. I've got 2 coats of the acrylic gloss on the front of the headstock. No problems, that's all ready to go. What I thought I'd do is get the neck finish onto the rest of the neck, because I'm kind of worried that, you know, when I start throwing the paint around, even though I'm going to mask all this off again, you know, any paint that gets on here is definitely going to stain the neck, and you know, I may not be able to sand all the colour out, you know, at the end of the day. I really don't want to sand anymore anyway, because I've got that nice line from the paint and all that stuff. So I think what I'll do is I'll grab my Wudtone, you know, clear neck finish, and I'll apply a few coats of that before we get to the pollocking. Okay, so I'm going to get a bit of this, the base coat, get it out into my little tray here, and bash it on there with a brush. Now in the past, to be honest with you, I haven't had much luck with the clear coats on this, the Wudtone clear coats, because I seem to get brush marks in it, even though it's meant to be self-leveling, and I'm using a nice fine brush. I do tend to get marks left in the Wudtone. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Someone watching this can give me some pointers as to what I am doing wrong. I would really appreciate it. But I'm just doing what I think is necessary, just brushing it on, trying not to go over it too many times. Try not to get onto the front of the headstock. Okay, how did I do? Yep, pretty well, that's good. Probably should have masked off the edge of the fretboard, but hey, I've started now. Alright, so that's done. Just 2 more coats of base to go, and I'll see you at the clear coats. Okay, so it's been 6 days. I've managed to get 3 coats of the Wudtone colourless neck finish base coat onto the neck here. I've used some 4/0 steel wool in between each coat, just to get rid of any of the little greebles that build up as you put the coats on. it's usually dust and stuff like that. It's nice and smooth. I'm really liking the colour. So now it's time to go on to the top coat. Same deal. I'm going to put on about three or four coats of top coat. I'm going to use my fine brush and steel wool in between each coat. Simple as. Let's get it done. Okay, so dip a little bit of this top coat into my retainer again. It's a lot thicker than the base coat. And brush it on. Easy. You can already see some brush lines in the clear there. I'm hoping that they'll self-level as it dries. But as I said, my track record is not real good with this stuff. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so it's as easy as that. I've got my brush over there, cleaning up in a bit of mineral terps, and yeah, it's just a matter of waiting this out now. Another 2 days or 3 days even for this clear coat to dry. A bit of steel wool, next coat. I reckon I'll get about 4 coats of clear on there and then see what I think. It's usually about the number I like. Anyway, I'll see you when that's done.